The night was blacker than ink. A thin crescent moon barely clung to the horizon, veiled by drifting clouds that smothered what little light might have offered comfort. Deep in the valley, a team of Navy SEALs moved like shadows among the jagged rocks, their boots pressed into the dirt without a sound, every step practiced, every breath controlled. Their objective had seemed straightforward when it was briefed back at base: infiltrate the stronghold of an insurgent leader who had been orchestrating weapons shipments throughout the region, capture him alive, and extract before dawn. The kind of mission that had gone right a dozen times before. The kind of mission that, on paper, should have been just another night at war. But missions had a way of rotting from the inside once the boots hit the ground. Lieutenant Commander Michael Harris crouched at the front of the column, his night vision goggles casting the world in eerie green. His hand shot up, and instantly his men froze, every one of them blending into the terrain as if they were a part of it. Harris had been in combat zones for nearly 15 years. He trusted his instincts more than he trusted maps, and right now, his gut was twisting. Something was wrong. The compound should have been just ahead, nestled into the valley's far ridge, but the silence pressing down on them was too complete. No dogs barking, no voices, no shifting of boots in the dirt. Just silence. Blue 1, hold position, Harris whispered into his throat mic. His voice was low, controlled, but the men heard the edge underneath. Copy, came the reply. From above, the faint hum of an aircraft circled. Captain Sarah Lawson's A-10 Warthog prowled the skies like a guardian angel. She was the Overwatch. For tonight, her bird fitted with missiles, bombs, and the infamous GA-U-8 Avenger cannon, a beast that could chew through steel and concrete alike. But she hadn't been called in yet. Her job was to watch, to wait, and to strike only if Harris gave the word. The SEALs crept closer, rifles sweeping every angle. They found the compound where it was supposed to be, walls of mud brick and corrugated, metal glowing under their NVGs, but it was empty, too empty. Doors stood ajar, chairs tipped over, fires smoldering in braziers. Whoever had been here was gone, and they had left in a hurry. Harris felt his chest tighten. "It's a setup," he muttered. The words had barely left his lips when the first shot cracked through the night. The bullet slammed into the dirt at the feet of the rear man, kicking up dust. Then the valley erupted. Muzzle flashes exploded from the ridgelines above, turning a green glow of night vision into a strobe-lit nightmare. Dozens of insurgents opened fire from elevated positions, their weapons hammering down into the valley where the SEALs were trapped. Contact left, contact right. Harris barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. His men dove for cover, returning fire with deadly precision, but they were outnumbered. For every fighter they dropped, two more seemed to emerge from the shadows. Bullets tore into the walls of the abandoned compound, spraying fragments of brick and metal. The air filled with the deafening roar of AK-47s and the hiss of RPGs streaking overhead. One rocket slammed into a wall near Harris, the explosion hurling him backward. His ears rang, dust filling his lungs as he rolled behind. A pile of rubble. "Blue 1, this is Iron Angel." Sarah's calm voice cut into his headset from above. "I have eyes on your position. Confirm fire support?" Harris spat dirt, blinking through the haze. His instincts screamed to call her in, but the ridges were too close, too crowded. One wrong strafing run, and she could kill half his team. Negative. Too tight. Hold fire. He snapped, even as the world around him fell apart. The SEALs fought like demons. They were the best in the world, trained to keep cool when hell itself opened up. But even the best bled. Petty Officer Ramirez took a round in the shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Doc Jensen was on him in seconds, dragging him back while firing one-handed. Another man's NVGs shattered as shrapnel sprayed across his face. "Commander, we're surrounded." Someone yelled over the gunfire. Harris knew it already. His men were pinned in the valley floor, cut off from retreat, with enemy fighters pouring down from both sides. The extraction point was gone, overrun. The mission was beyond salvage. He felt the weight of it sink into his gut, the ugly realization that tonight wouldn't end in triumph. Mission's finished, Harris growled into his mic, though every fiber of him hated the words. Fall back to survival positions. We hold as long as we can. The men didn't argue. They knew what it meant. No target captured. No extraction. Just survival, if that was even possible. Above, Sarah tightened her grip on her stick. She could hear everything, every desperate call, every gunshot crackling through the combs. From her cockpit, she saw the heat signatures swarming the ridges like ants around sugar. Her warthog had the firepower to carve a path, but Harris had ordered her to hold. Her jaw clenched. She respected the SEALs, respected their discipline. But watching them die in real time was tearing her apart. On the ground, Harris crawled to Ramirez's position, blood streaking the dirt. "You hang in there, Marine," he muttered, pressing down on the wound while Jensen wrapped a tourniquet. Around them, bullets ripped through the night, sparking. Off stone. He grabbed his radio again. "Base, this is Blue 1. We've lost the objective. Request emergency extraction immediate. Multiple wounded." "We are." His voice cracked as another explosion rocked the ground. "We are compromised," silence answered him. The comms were jammed. A cold dread spread through Harris's chest. They weren't just surrounded, they were cut off. The men knew it too. He saw it in their eyes, wide under their helmets. In the way their movements grew sharper, more desperate. SEALs didn't quit, but even warriors knew when the end had come. Harris pressed his back against a wall, rifle tight in his grip. He was their commander, and if this was the end, then he'd lead them into it. He opened his mouth to issue the next command, but before he could, Sarah's voice cut through again. "Blue 1, Iron Angel, I see what's happening down there. You're not finished yet." Her words rang against the despair closing in on the team. Harris clenched his teeth. She didn't understand. From her perch in the sky, things always looked simpler. Down here, in the mud and blood, the reality was different. Still, something in her tone, the steel, the fire made him pause. Sarah banked her at 10 lower, engines screaming through the valley. Her hands hovered over her weapons controls. The GAU-8 cannon was ready, eager. She exhaled slowly, eyes locking onto the ridgeline crawling with fighters. "Not on my watch," she whispered, a vow to herself, to them. And then the warthog roared. Captain Sarah Lawson had always loved the night sky. It was strange to think about, given her profession, given the fact that most of her nights were spent in a cockpit with death riding on her wings. But up here, at 3,500 feet, the stars seemed to belong to her. They glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet, steady and eternal. They never blinked, never wavered, not like men on the ground. Her call sign, Iron Angel, wasn't given to her for grace. It was for what she flew. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately and sometimes fearfully known as the Warthog. Sarah knew her bird wasn't pretty. It wasn't sleek or fast like the F-16s. It didn't dance in the sky with elegance. No, the A-10 was ugly, slow, heavy, and damn near indestructible. But when it roared, it meant salvation for the men below. She ran a gloved hand across the console, fingers tapping against the weapons panel. The gauges hummed, green lights steady in the dim glow of the cockpit. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, slung beneath the fuselage, was locked and loaded, its 30mm rounds, capable of ripping through armored vehicles like they were paper. Missiles sat snug under her wings. Bombs hung heavy, waiting. Her bird was hungry. Through her night vision display, the valley below came alive. Heat signatures burned across. The ridgelines, dozens, maybe hundreds of enemy fighters, pouring down onto the SEAL team, pinned at the bottom. She could see their desperate movements, the flashes of return fire, the explosions of RPGs lighting up the valley. Her heart clenched. She'd flown Overwatch for SEAL teams before. She respected them more than any other unit she'd worked with. Silent, lethal, disciplined, they were shadows in human form. And right now, those shadows were flickering out, one by one. Blue one, Iron Angel. I've got a full visual. You're surrounded, Commander. Give me the green light, and I'll tear them off you. She waited for the reply, hands trembling over the trigger. The radio crackled, Harris's voice breaking through the chaos. Negative. It's too tight, too close. You'll kill us all. Sarah gritted her teeth. He was right partly. The ridges hugged the valley so tightly that any strafing run risked friendly fire, but doing nothing was worse. She adjusted her heading, banking left, scanning for any angle that might work. Inside her helmet, her own breathing was loud. Calm down, Lawson. Think. She checked the coordinates again, running quick mental calculations. The insurgents weren't just scattered, they were coordinated. Whoever had set this ambush had planned for every move. The SEALs had been lured into the valley deliberately, like prey into a kill box. And Harris had walked them straight into it. Sarah exhaled, forcing the thought away. Blame didn't matter now. They were in it together, and it was her job to keep them alive. Another voice crackled through her headset, one of the SEALs shouting, Commander, we're getting overrun. We can't hold much longer. Sarah's pulse spiked. She glanced. At the fuel gauge, plenty of time left. Ammunition more than enough. The only thing standing between her and action was Harris's refusal. Her training told her to obey. Protocol was drilled into every pilot. Ground Force Commander made the call. She was their eyes, their hammer, but not their leader. If he said hold fire, she held fire. But her gut, that same gut that had saved her more times than she could count, told her something else. If she didn't move soon, the team would be nothing but ghosts. She thought back to her father, an Army Ranger who'd served in 2 wars. Before she was even born. He used to tell her, the hardest part of leadership isn't the risk, it's the choice. When the rules tell you to wait, but your conscience tells you to act, that's when you find out who you really are. Sarah clenched her jaw. She knew exactly who she was. I'm not leaving you down there, she whispered to herself. Her thumb slid over the master arm switch, flicking it on. A low hum filled the cockpit as her systems armed, the Warthog awakening fully. The cannon was ready, the missiles primed. Her bird was no longer circling. It was hunting. Blue one, Iron. Angel, she said into the radio, her tone steady but firm. I can clear you a path, but I need you to trust me. Give me your grid. There was silence. Gunfire crackled faintly through the comms, men shouting, the distant thunder of explosions. She imagined Harris crouched in the dirt, blood on his helmet, weighing his pride against his men's lives. Finally, his voice came back, clipped and hard. I said negative, Captain. Hold position. That's an order. Sarah closed her eyes. The word stung, but not enough to stop her. Another explosion ripped across her display, and she saw one of the SEAL's drop heat signature flaring, then fading. Her throat tightened. That was a man, a life. Someone's brother, someone's son. And she was just supposed to watch? No. Sorry, Commander, she murmured, her voice low. But this is my fight too. She shoved the throttle forward, the A-10 engine screaming as she dove. The ground rushed up toward her, the valley yawning wide. Her HUD locked onto the ridgeline, crawling with insurgents, the cannon's crosshairs snapping into place. At 600 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared, a guttural growl that shook the very air. The sound was like nothing else in the world, deep, metallic, a death knell from the skies. A river of 30mm shells poured into the ridgeline, ripping through rock, dirt, and flesh. Explosions erupted as insurgents were torn apart, their weapons shattering, their positions collapsing. The SEALs below flinched, eyes snapping upward as the night sky came alive. They knew that sound. Every soldier knew it. It was the sound of salvation. Sarah pulled up, the warthog banking hard as the ridgeline erupted in flames. Her heart thundered in her chest, adrenaline surging like fire through her veins. She swung around for another pass, locking onto a cluster of fighters scrambling for cover. This isn't over. She shouted into the radio, though no one could hear the fury in her voice. The insurgents scattered, panic rippling through their ranks. The ambush, once so perfectly coordinated, had just met the hand of God. Below, Harris stared up at the sky, disbelief in his eyes. Against his order, against the rules, she had acted, and in seconds she had turned the battlefield. He pressed, his radio, voice hoarse. "Iron Angel, what the hell are you doing?" Sarah's reply came sharp, uncompromising. "Saving your men." Lieutenant Commander Michael Harris had never said those words in his life. He had been a SEAL for 16 years, through raids that left entire cities trembling, through firefights where the odds had been worse than this, through nights so bloody and brutal that death had felt like an inevitability. But he had never once told his men they were finished. And yet, as he crouched behind a crumbling wall, bullets chewing the stone into dust around him, he felt the word tear from his throat like a wound. "We're finished," he muttered, low enough that only those nearest could hear. The words hung heavy in the smoke-filled air, more damning than the enemy's gunfire. Petty Officer First Class Jake Mercer, his second in command, whipped his head toward him, eyes wide behind shattered NVGs. "Sir, say again?" Harris almost swallowed. It almost pulled the words back. But lying to his men would do no good now. He gestured toward the ridgelines, toward the endless muzzle flashes raining fire into the valley. "You can't break out. Extraction's compromised. Comms are jammed. We're surrounded and cut off." His jaw clenched, voice cracking for the first time in years. "It's over." Silence from Mercer. Silence from the others crouched nearby, the truth striking harder than any bullet. The team was bleeding out, piece by piece. Ramirez was pale, his shoulder wounds soaked through despite Jensen's field dressings. Another man, Petty Officer Hall, had caught shrapnel in his leg and could barely stand. Every movement through. The dirt was slower, heavier. Their ammo bags were lighter now, their rifles firing in controlled bursts, not because of discipline, but because they had to ration every round. The insurgents, meanwhile, seemed endless. They poured from the ridges. Like a tide, voices shouting in harsh, guttural bursts, their muzzle flashes flickering like fireflies of death. For every fighter Sarah Lawson's cannon had torn apart from above, another appeared, hungry for blood. Harris wiped the grime from his face, forcing his eyes skyward. The A-10 roared overhead again, its engines a low growl that rattled his bones. He should have felt relief, should have felt hope. But instead, he felt only the gnawing guilt of a commander who had led his men into a death trap. He keyed his radio, static hissing back. "Base, Blue One, do you copy?" Nothing. He tried again. "Base, this is Blue One, do you hear me?" Only silence. The enemy's jammers were doing their job. They were alone. Mercer crouched closer, shouting over the gunfire. "Sir, Iron Angel's still circling. She wants to engage. You heard her. She can open us a path." Harris shook his head sharply. "Negative. Too risky. We're in the box, Mercer. One miscalculation, and she'll cut us down with the rest of them." Mercer's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, if she doesn't engage, we're dead anyway." Harris slammed a fist into the dirt, rage and despair boiling in him at once. Mercer was right, and he knew it. But command weighed heavier than logic. He had always been the one to keep control, to hold the line, to ensure his men followed him through fire and back. If he surrendered that control now, what was left of him? A shriek cut through the night, an RPG. Harris ducked instinctively, the rocket slamming into the compound wall with a thunderous crack. The blast hurled dust and shards of stone through the air. The shockwave left his ears ringing. When the smoke cleared, Halle was gone. Just gone. Jensen screamed, scrambling toward the blast site, but Harris grabbed his vest and yanked him back. There was nothing to find. Just blood, shrapnel, and silence. Harris's chest heaved. Another man down, another name to carry. He wanted to scream, wanted to tear at the sky and demand to know why. But all that came out was a rasped whisper. "We're finished." Overhead, Sarah Lawson heard it. Her headset crackled with his voice, low and broken. She had heard men scream on the battlefield, had heard desperation before, but never that word. Finished. She gritted her teeth, fingers tightening on the controls of her A-10. No, not yet. Not while she was here. She banked low, her HUD scanning. The ridges. She could see the insurgents setting up heavier weaponry, now mortar, more RPGs. If they deployed those, the SEALs wouldn't last 5 minutes. She flipped a switch, selecting a pair of a GM-65 Mavericks under her wings. Precision strike missiles. Perfect for fortified positions. Blue 1, Iron Angel. She snapped into the radio. "I am not standing by while you die. Give me a strike." Zone. No response. She tried again. "Blue 1, this is Iron Angel. Commander, if you don't call the shot, I will." Below, Harris pressed his radio but didn't speak. He couldn't. His pride and training warred against the reality that screamed in his ears. If he gave control to an Air Force pilot, worse, if he gave control to anyone, he would no longer be the commander. Mercer leaned in again, voice fierce. "Sir, with respect, get over yourself. We're dying down here. Let her take the lead." Harris glared at him, fury flashing in his eyes. But Mercer didn't flinch. He was right, and Harris knew it. He swallowed hard, throat burning. "I said we're finished," Harris rasped. "But maybe." He looked skyward to the circling warthog. Maybe she doesn't agree. Sarah didn't need his permission anymore. She had heard enough. "Copy that, Commander," she said, her voice steady as steel. "Iron Angel is engaging." She dove. The Maverick streaked from her wings, firetails blazing against the dark. They slammed into the mortar positions with thunderous force, the ridges erupting into fireballs that lit the valley like daylight. Insurgents were flung through the air, their ambush collapsing in seconds. The SEALs blinked through the sudden brightness, stunned. For the first time all night, the battlefield seemed to tilt in their favor. Harris stared up at the sky, disbelief twisting inside him. She had defied him. She had taken control. And somehow it had worked. Mercer slapped his shoulder, shouting, "Over the chaos. She's not done yet, sir. Look at her go." Indeed, Sarah banked again, cannon roaring as she strafed the ridge. The sound thundered through the valley, rattling bones and hearts alike. The insurgents broke, panic rippling through their ranks. What had been a carefully orchestrated trap was now a massacre, because one pilot had refused to listen. Harris's. Chest heaved, torn between rage and gratitude. He had declared the mission finished. She had declared otherwise. And in that moment, he wasn't sure which one of them was right. But as the night burned bright with fire and fury, one thing was clear. The battle was far from over. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't finished after all. The valley had been a tomb, but when the cannon fired, it became something else. It was a sound unlike any other in war, deeper than thunder, harsher than lightning, mechanical yet primal. A growl that started in the earth and ended in men's bones. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spat fire, its 30mm rounds tearing across the ridgeline in a torrent of destruction. The insurgents who had moments ago been pressing their advantage now stumbled, froze, broke. The SEALs crouched low in the dirt, stunned by the noise and the sudden silence that followed it. "Sweet Mother of God," Mercer muttered, wide-eyed as tracer fire stitched across the rocks above. Harris didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was dry, his ears ringing, his mind whirling. He had been in battles with air support before, but never like this. This wasn't support. This was domination. Above, Captain Sarah Lawson pulled up sharply, sweat trickling down her temples inside her helmet. Her pulse was a steady hammer. In her throat, her A-10 shuddered as the cannon cooled, smoke trailing back into the night. She barely had time to catch her breath before her display lit up again, dozens of new signatures. Fighters rallying along the eastern slope. They weren't broken yet, not completely. "Blue 1, Iron Angel," she called into her mic. "You still breathing down there?" Static, then Harris's voice low, clipped. "We're here." Sarah exhaled, relief tinged with anger. She could still hear the resignation in his tone, as though he hadn't seen what she had just done. She bit back the urge to snap at him. This wasn't the time for ego wars. "Copy. Stay down. I'm coming around." She banked left, her bird rolling through the night sky, engines screaming like war drums. Her HUD tracked the enemy positions with unflinching precision. She flipped a switch and armed her Hydra rockets. No time for finesse, she needed chaos. Below, Harris and his men heard the engines scream overhead again. A sound rolled across the valley, a promise of death to anyone who wasn't wearing their flag. The insurgents fired upward in desperation, RPGs streaking into the night. Bright trails of smoke arced toward the A-10, but Sarah juked, dipping low, then climbing. The rockets left her wings in a violent burst, streaking down into the ridge. The explosions ripped through the hillside, dirt and fire blasting skyward. Fighters were torn apart, their weapons hurled into the night. For a moment, the valley looked like it had been split open by an earthquake. The SEALs used the lull to drag Ramirez further back, Jensen gritting his teeth as he worked. Harris fired into the smoke, dropping an enemy fighter who stumbled too close. He moved on instinct now, his training carrying him where his mind struggled to keep up. But still, part of him couldn't let go of the shame. He had called the mission finished. She hadn't. The radio crackled again. Sarah's voice, steady as stone. "Commander, you need to move. Now, push west toward the low rocks. I'll keep the ridges clear." Harris froze. She was giving him orders. An Air Force pilot dictating ground maneuvers to a Navy SEAL team. Every fiber of his being screamed against it. But when he looked to Mercer, to Jensen, to Ramirez bleeding pale and gasping, they weren't waiting for his pride. They were waiting for a leader. Mercer met his eyes, unflinching. "Sir, she's right." Harris swallowed hard, then nodded. "All right, move west." "Go, go, go." The SEALs surged into motion, breaking from their cover in a sprint. Bullets kicked up dirt at their heels, but the Warthog screamed overhead again, cannon blazing. The ground shook as rounds tore into the hillside, sending enemy fighters scrambling. Sarah's eyes tracked the team's heat signatures as they darted across the valley. She adjusted her fire, cutting down clusters of enemies that tried to flank them. Every squeeze of the trigger bought them seconds. Every second was a miracle. Below, Harris felt the strange shift in the air. He wasn't leading anymore. Not fully. He was executing orders. And yet, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt liberating. For once, someone else bore the weight of command. Someone he could trust. "Commander, keep moving west. You're 30 meters from a depression natural cover," Sarah called. Harris relayed instantly. 30 meters, move it." They dove into the depression, lungs burning, weapons tight to their shoulders. Dirt walls rose around them, giving temporary shelter. Mercer collapsed beside him, gasping. "I don't know what she is, sir. But she ain't human." Harris almost smiled. Almost. Above, Sarah circled, sweat dripping down her spine, muscles tense from hours in the cockpit. She had trained for this, lived for this, but never had she felt the stakes so sharp. Each decision carried lives on its back. Her radio buzzed again, Harris's voice, steadier now. "Iron Angel, we're in position. What's next?" Sarah let the breath slip from her lungs. There it was, the shift. He wasn't resisting her anymore. She scanned the terrain, noting clusters of enemies regrouping near the northern slope. She armed her final pair of bombs, GBU-38s guided, precise, devastating. "Hold tight," she said. "I'll clear your northern flank." The bombs fell like silent meteors, whistling only in the last seconds. They struck with earth-shattering force, fireballs rising into the night, shockwaves flattening everything nearby. The northern slope was gone, replaced by fire and rubble. The SEALs ducked, shielding their faces as the shockwave rolled over them. Heat licked their skin, the smell of scorched earth thick in the air. When the echoes faded, a heavy silence blanketed the valley. The gunfire had stopped. The shouting was gone. The insurgents had broken. For the first time all night, Harris lifted his head without flinching. He could hear his own breathing. He could hear his men's. They were alive. Sarah banked wide, her A-10 roaring in a long, sweeping arc. From her cockpit, she scanned the valley again. Fires smoldered, bodies lay scattered, smoke curled into the night. But her screen showed no fresh signatures. For now, the field was theirs. She keyed her radio. "Blue 1, Iron Angel. Your path is clear. Move west until you hit the dry creek bed. That'll lead you toward extraction." Harris pressed his mic, his voice steadier than it had been in hours. "Copy that." He looked to his men, nodding once. "You heard her. Let's move." The team rose, battered but alive, dragging Ramirez with them. As they slipped westward, Harris cast one last look over his shoulder. Fires still burned where the ambush had been so perfect, so absolute. It should have been their grave. Instead, it had become their crucible. And above, circling like a sentinel, the warthog roared again, reminding them all that the fight wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The valley behind them still burned, smoke curling upward like black ribbons against the pale dawn. The SEAL team moved westward, their boots crunching in the dry earth, the weight of exhaustion dragging at every step. Ramirez's groans filled. The air, faint but steady a heartbeat they clung to. Above, the A-10 circled like a steel hawk, its engines rumbling low. Captain Sarah Lawson's eyes never left the tactical display, watching the heat signatures of the SEALs as though her gaze alone could keep them alive. For a moment, silence hung between ground and sky. Then the radio cracked. "Blue 1, Iron. Angel, status?" Commander Harris pressed his mic, his voice clipped, all business. "We're mobile. Pushing west toward the creek bed." "Copy," Sarah replied. You've got fresh signatures moving in from the North Ridge. 20 or more. They'll cut you off in 5 minutes. The team froze. Harris's jaw tightened as he scanned the ridge, squinting against the rising light. He couldn't see them yet, but he trusted her eyes. Suggestions? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. Sarah didn't hesitate. Divert southwest. There's a ravine you can use for cover. I'll strafe the ridge and slow them down. Harris bristled. She wasn't just relaying intel now. She was dictating movement again. His gut twisted. He was a SEAL commander, forged in years of dirt and blood. No pilot, no matter how skilled, knew ground like he did. He keyed the radio. Negative. Southwest takes us off course. Creek bed leads to extraction. We stay on mission. A pause, and her voice, low, steady, with a weight that cut through his stubbornness. Commander, if you head straight, you'll be cut off. You won't make it. Harris ground his teeth. Around him, the men waited Mercer, Jensen, even Ramirez, pale and barely conscious, their eyes flicking between their leader and the sky. This was the clash. Pride against survival. Sir, Mercer said carefully, breaking the silence. She hasn't been wrong yet. Harris shot him a glare, but Mercer held his gaze, unwavering. For the first time, Harris felt the balance of authority shifting, not because he'd lost his men's respect, but because Sarah had earned it. The radio crackled again. Blue 1, this isn't about chain of command. It's about staying alive. You can argue with me later, but right now, you need to move southwest. Her tone wasn't pleading. It was iron. Harris inhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had built his career on control, on being the man who made the calls. But tonight, no. This morning the battlefield had changed. The rules had changed, and she had changed him. He pressed his mic. Copy. Diverting southwest. The team moved as one, adjusting course. Harris pushed the pace, determined that if he wasn't giving the orders, he'd at least set the example. Above, Sarah dipped her warthog low, the engine screaming as she lined up the northern ridge. She squeezed the trigger, the GAU-8 roaring. In a thunderous burst, the cannon fire ripped across the slope, throwing dirt, rock, and men into the air. Fighters scattered, their advance shattered. From the ground, the SEALs watched in awe. The roar no longer shocked them. It was comfort, like the growl of a guard dog at their side. Still, tension simmered between Harris and Sarah. Every instruction she gave carried the unspoken reminder that his authority had cracked. Every acknowledgement he made was a surrender of ego. But survival has no patience for pride. The ravine appeared ahead, a jagged scar in the earth. The SEALs slid down into it, the walls rising on either side, giving them cover at last. They moved single file, Harris in front, Jensen dragging Ramirez at the rear. Sarah's voice broke in again. You've got 10 minutes before the next wave hits your flank. Keep moving. Harris keyed his mic. Copy. He didn't argue. This time, they pressed on through the ravine, the light growing brighter as the sun clawed its way above the horizon. Harris could feel exhaustion weighing on him, dragging at his legs, but Sarah's voice kept them moving, each report from above a thread pulling them forward. At last, the ravine opened onto a dry plain, the creek bed winding in the distance. The extraction point was still miles away, but closer now than it had been. The men slumped to catch their breath, but Sarah's voice cut in sharply. No brakes. Enemy vehicles inbound 2 technicals with mounted guns. You stop here, you die here. Harris didn't hesitate. On your feet. Move! And that was... The moment the clash had passed, Harris wasn't fighting her anymore. He was taking her words and making them his own, passing them down the chain. Sarah smiled grimly inside her cockpit. The commander had bent, but not broken. Together, they were something new, something dangerous. As the SEALs pushed across the plain, Sarah banked wide, her eyes locked on the dust trails of the enemy. Trucks closing fast. Her hands gripped the controls, her pulse steady. The clash of authority had ended, not with one voice silenced, but with two voices becoming one. For the first time, Harris didn't feel like the mission was over. First time, he believed they might actually make it. The plain stretched before them like a desert battlefield, flat and exposed, offering no mercy and no cover. The creek bed, a ribbon of dust and dry stone, was still a mile away, yet it felt like forever. Every man in the SEAL team knew they were one burst of gunfire away from being erased. Above, Sarah Lawson's A-10 circled like a guardian angel cast in iron. The engines droned, a low growl that reminded the SEALs they weren't alone. Yet Harris knew the sound wasn't just comfort. It was a clock. Every second Sarah spent overhead earned fuel. Every second she was with them was borrowed time. Blue 1, Iron Angel. Sarah's voice crackled through the comms. 2 technicals closing fast from your north. Dust trail shows they're pushing max speed. Mounted DSHK heavy machine guns. They'll tear you apart in the open. Harris pressed his mic, his eyes scanning the horizon. He saw it now, the faint trails of dust, shimmering in the rising sun. Copy. We'll hit the creek bed before they cross our line. Negative, Sarah replied instantly, her tone sharp. They'll intersect in 2 minutes. You need to cut east. Harris's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to stick to the creek bed, the route he had chosen. But Part 5 had already broken the wall. He wasn't fighting her anymore. He was learning to bend. All right, he said into the radio, his voice steady. Team, divert east. The SEALs shifted course without hesitation, their boots pounding the earth. Ramirez stumbled between Mercer and Jensen, his face ghostly pale but determined. Sarah watched them through her targeting pod, her gut nodding. They were so small down there, specks in a wasteland, so fragile. One good burst from the technicals, and it would all be over. She banked low, lining up her approach. Blue 1, I'm going in. Keep moving east, and don't stop. You'll know when to hit the creek bed. Copy, Harris said. For a moment, their voices carried something new, not defiance, not tension, but trust. Sarah pushed the throttle, the A-10 dropping lower. The technicals roared across the plain, machine guns swiveling, gunners already opening fire. Tracer. Rounds lit the air, glowing lines ripping toward the SEALs. Down, Harris barked, shoving his men toward the dirt. Bullets kicked up soil around them, dust spraying in every direction. And then the sky answered. The GU-8 cannon roared, a sound that drowned out everything gunfire, shouting even the pounding of hearts. 30-millimeter shells raked across. The lead technical, tearing it apart in a storm of steel and flame. The vehicle erupted, shrapnel flying as the gunner vanished in the explosion. The second truck swerved violently, its gunner firing wildly at the sky. Sarah pulled up hard, banking right, lining for another pass. Sweat stung her eyes, but her hands were steady. Blue 1, second target still mobile. I'll finish it. Copy, Harris replied, crouched low with his men. His eyes followed the streak of her bird across the sky. For the first time in his career, he realized he wasn't the center of the battlefield. She was. Sarah dove again, the A-10 screaming as the cannon unleashed another burst. The second truck detonated, a fireball blooming in the dawn. Debris rained down across the plain, the sound echoing like thunder. The SEALs rose, dirt clinging to their gear, eyes wide with relief. Angels clearing the way, Jensen muttered, shaking his head. Damn glad she's ours. On your feet, Harris ordered, though his voice carried something different, now less steel, more humanity. We've still got ground to cover. Move. The team surged forward, cutting east as Sarah had directed. Within minutes, the terrain shifted, a shallow depression rising ahead, the creek bed. Sarah's voice came again, calm but urgent. Blue 1, you've got 30 enemy signatures converging from the west ridge. They're late to the fight, but they'll be on you soon. I can delay them, but I can't hold them all. Harris didn't hesitate. Copy. We'll set up defensive positions in the creek bed. Angel, hit the ridge hard. Buy us time. Roger that, Sarah said. The alliance was no longer reluctant. It was instinctive. She saw the threats. He shaped the defense. Together, they were weaving survival from chaos. The SEALs slid into the dry creek, rifles snapping up, arcs of fire established. Harris moved among them, adjusting positions, his voice sharp but measured. Ramirez lay against the bank. Mercer crouched beside him, his saw braced for fire. Above, Sarah angled in, her eyes locked on the west ridge. Dozens of heat signatures glowed in her scope, fighters pouring down toward the creek. She exhaled, her finger tightening on the trigger. The GAU-8 sang again, ripping across the ridge. Dirt and bodies exploded in a storm of dust. Fighters scattered, screaming, diving for cover. But Sarah didn't relent. She wheeled the A-10 around, unleashing missiles that slammed into the slope, blasting rocks and fire into the air. On the ground, Harris's men watched in awe. The ambush was crumbling before it could even form. Angels carving them up, Mercer said, firing bursts at stragglers who made it through. Harris keyed his mic. Iron Angel, you're buying us the world down here. Keep it coming. There was a pause, then her voice firm, but softer. Somehow, you're welcome. It wasn't victory, not yet. The insurgents weren't broken. More fighters pushed through the smoke, firing as they advanced. Bullets tore into the creek bed, snapping overhead. The SEALs fired back, the air filled with the deafening chaos of battle. Sarah circled, her cannon chewing through another wave. But fuel was burning fast. Ammunition was draining. Harris, she said into the comms, her voice edged with tension. I can hold them a little longer, but I'm running low. You need to move. Where? Harris demanded. Extraction's still too far. We can't outrun them. There's a wadi southeast, Sarah said, flipping through her maps. Natural cover. You make it there. You can hold until birds come for you. Harris considered it exposed ground to cross, more risk. But he trusted her now. He pressed his mic. Copy. SEALs on me. We're moving southeast. Angel. Keep the ridge hot. A team broke from the creek bed, sprinting across the plain. Gunfire snapped at their heels, but Sarah's cannon answered, every burst pushing the enemy back. Above, she felt her warthog groan, the ammo counter blinking low. Her bird was bleeding strength, but she refused to stop. Come on, she whispered, watching the tiny figures of the SEALs running below. Come on, just a little further. The wadi appeared at last, a jagged gash in the earth. Harris led his men into it, sliding down the walls, taking up new positions. Blue 1 in position, he called. Angel status? Sarah glanced at her panel fuel critical, ammo nearly dry. Her heart hammered. I've got one more pass. Left, she said. Make it count. Harris looked at his men, sweat and blood streaking their faces. He pressed his mic, his voice steady. We'll hold. You've done more than enough. Sarah smiled faintly, though no one could see it. Not yet. She banked hard, lined up her final run, and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 thundered. One last time, ripping through the ridge, scattering the enemy in a storm of fire. Then silence. The cannon clicked empty. Her fuel light blinked red. Sarah pulled up, climbing high, her chest tight. Blue 1, you're clear? For now. In the wadi, Harris lowered his rifle, his breath ragged. He looked at his men, then at the sky. Angel, he said into the radio, his voice carrying a weight it had never held before. We wouldn't be breathing without you. And for the first time, Sarah Lawson believed him. The wadi was a scar in the earth narrow, jagged and dark. It gave the SEALs cover for the moment, but cover was not salvation. Harris knew it, and so did every man crouched in the dirt, rifles pointed toward the rim above. The enemy was regrouping. The silence was deceptive. It wasn't peace. It was the gathering inhale before the storm. Sarah circled above, her A-10 groaning with exhaustion. Fuel gauges blinked warnings, ammo counters flatlined. She was out of teeth. All she had left was her presence, the illusion of power in her shadow on the ground. But illusions could only buy so much time. Blue 1, she called over the radio, voice steady despite the weight in her chest. You've got 10 minutes, maybe less, before they press again. I can't cover you. You'll need to move. Harris crouched against the wadi wall, helmet streaked with dust and blood. His eyes flicked to Ramirez, pale and sweating, leg bandaged but bleeding through. They couldn't stay, not with him slipping closer to shock. He keyed his mic. Copy, Angel. Extraction bird still inbound? Static crackled. Then the comms operator back at base cut in. Raven 1 en route, ETA 25 minutes. You'll need to reach Point Echo for pickup. Coordinates inbound. Harris's stomach dropped. 25 minutes. With enemy reinforcements hunting them like wolves. He studied the map Sarah had uploaded earlier, running routes in his head. Between them and Point Echo lay open ground and more ridges. Death, unless they punched through fast. He glanced at his men, sweat-streaked, faces carved with exhaustion, but eyes still burning with fight. Mercer checking his saw, Jensen reloading. Carter wrapping another bandage around Ramirez's thigh. These weren't men ready to surrender. Harris pressed his mic again. Angel, I need eyes on the cleanest path to Echo. Sarah swallowed hard, scanning her HUD. She was tired too, body aching from hours in the cockpit, but she forced her. Mind sharp. This wasn't just a job anymore. These were her men now, whether the Navy said so or not. Copy, Blue 1. South Ridge is swarming. North looks thinner. If you move now, you'll have a gap. But you'll be exposed for at least 2 clicks. 2 clicks in the open, Harris muttered, more to himself than anyone else. It was suicide, unless... He looked up, scanning the sky, the gray shape of Sarah's bird circling like a hawk. Angel, can you make noise? A pause, then her laugh, sharp and tired. You mean scare the hell out of them without firing a shot? Exactly. Roger that. Just run when I roar. Harris looked at his men, lifting his voice. So? Every SEAL heard it. This is it. We break for Point Echo now. Stay tight, stay low, stay alive. Ramirez goes in the middle. Move on my mark. He lifted his rifle, heart pounding. For hours they had been prey, hunted and pinned. Now they would flip the script. 3, 2, 1, move. The SEALs surged from the wadi like shadows, torn from the earth. Boots pounded, weapons ready, breaths ragged. At the same instant, Sarah dove. The A-10 screamed low across the ridge, its engines howling, the thunder of its empty cannon rattling the air like Judgment Day. Dust and rock exploded in the insurgents' faces. They fired wildly, panicked, their shots scattering wide. From the ground, Harris saw it work. Enemy fighters ducked, diving for cover, convinced death was falling from the sky. Go, 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 he barked, dragging Ramirez forward with Mercer. The team sprinted, the open plain stretching like an ocean of death. Every step felt too slow, every breath too loud. But Sarah kept them covered, banking again and again, diving low, the scream of her engines, a wall of fear the enemy couldn't cross. For 2 clicks, it worked. For 2 clicks, the illusion of power held. But illusions always break. Gunfire. Cracked from the north, a squad of fighters who hadn't flinched, pouring fire across the plain. Bullets ripped through dust, snapping past ears. Contact left. Jensen shouted, dropping to a knee, his rifle barking. "Keep moving." Harris roared, firing as he ran, his shots controlled, precise. "Angel, North Squad." Sarah's hands gripped the stick, heart pounding. She had nothing left to shoot. Nothing but her bird itself. She dove. The A-10 roared so low the insurgents scattered, convinced she was about to flatten them. Rocks and dirt blasted into the air, and in the chaos, Harris's men pushed past the kill zone. But then came the inevitable. A sharp crack. Ramirez screamed, his body jerking. A round had torn across his shoulder, adding to his already broken body. Mercer and Carter dragged him, teeth gritted, refusing to let him fall. Blood streaked the dirt, but the SEALs didn't stop. "Angel," Harris barked. Voice strained, "We're 2 minutes out from Echo. Hold them." Sarah climbed, banking hard. Her bird wheezed, fuel at fumes. She glanced at the gauges, then at the men below. She'd give them every last drop. She dove again, rolling so low, her wings nearly brushed the ground. The insurgents froze, there, gunfire faltering. The SEALs ran, sprinting with the last of their strength, hearts hammering. And then, at last, Point Echo appeared. A rocky plateau marked by smoke signal friendly, waiting. "Angel, we see Echo," Harris shouted. "Copy," Sarah said, relief breaking through her fatigue. "Bird is inbound 30 seconds. Hold the perimeter until it lands." The SEALs scrambled into position, rifles snapping up, firing at. Shadows closing from the ridges. Harris dropped beside Mercer, squeezing off bursts, shouting commands. The thump of rotors grew louder. Raven 1 swept in low, kicking up a storm of dust. The Black Hawk touched down hard, side doors flying open. "Move, move, move!" Harris roared, hauling Ramirez toward the bird. The SEALs piled in, firing. To the last second. Sarah banked above, her warthog trembling, fuel gauge screaming empty. She circled one last time, watching their men climb aboard. The Black Hawk lifted, bullets snapping past, but it rose, clawing into the sky. The SEALs were safe. Alive. Harris's voice cut through the comms, ragged, fierce. "Angel, we're airborne. Mission saved, because of you." Sarah exhaled, her body trembling. Her bird was done, but she didn't care. She'd gotten them out. And as the Black Hawk dwindled into the horizon, Harris leaned against the cabin wall, Ramirez bleeding beside him, and whispered to himself, "Not finished after all." The Black Hawk carved a path through the rising sun, its rotors thundering over the broken Afghan hills. Inside, the SEALs slumped against the cabin walls, bloodied, burned out, but alive. Alive. The word had weight now. More than medals. More than orders. Mercer held Ramirez against his chest, pressing bandages into the man's shoulder and thigh. Ramirez groaned, but his eyes were open. Barely, but open. Carter sat beside them, rifle still in hand, scanning the door as though the fight hadn't ended. Jensen leaned his head back against the bulkhead, eyes closed, lips moving in a muttered prayer Harris couldn't hear. And Harris himself, he sat on the floor, helmet in his lap, lungs burning from dust and smoke. He had led men through hell before, but never like this. Never with his command stripped down to bone and rebuilt by another voice, another will. His gaze lifted toward the open door. Out there, somewhere above them, Sarah Lawson was limping her A-10 home on fumes. The thought tightened something in his chest. The pilot, the outsider, the one who had stepped into his command, bent it, reshaped it, and in the end saved it. He pressed his hand over his face, the roughness of stubble and grime scratching against his palm. Commanders didn't admit weakness. They didn't share control. And yet, had he not bent when she told him to, they'd be corpses in a burning. Wadi. He lowered his hand and looked at his men. "We're not finished," he muttered, half to himself. Mercer lifted his head, weary but grinning. "Damn right we're not." A Black Hawk thundered westward, carrying them toward the safety of the forward operating base. Far behind them, Sarah's Warthog crawled across the sky, engines whining in protest. Every warning light blinked now: fuel, hydraulics, overheat. She was holding the bird together by sheer will. "Come on, baby," she murmured, stroking the throttle as if it were alive. Just a little further. Her chest ached from hours. In the harness, her throat raw from shouting combs. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging, but she didn't blink it away. She thought of Harris's voice on the radio, rough and commanding, breaking just enough in the last seconds to show gratitude. She thought of the men sprinting across open ground, her engines roaring above them like a shield. It had been more than a mission. It had been something no manual, no doctrine, no chain of command could define. Her bird sputtered, dipped, then caught again. Sarah bit her lip until it bled, coaxing the A-10 home. If the SEALs had made it, she would too. She refused to be the one who didn't. The forward operating base roared to life when Raven 1 touched down. Medics swarmed the Black Hawk, pulling Ramirez out first, shouting orders, IVs already in their hands. Mercer stumbled off next, then Jensen, then Carter. Each man looked hollowed out, but alive. Harris followed last, boots hitting the tarmac. Hard. The sun was full now, throwing golden light across the base. For a moment, he just stood there, helmet under his arm, breathing in the air like it was the first breath of his life. He turned his head, scanning the sky. Minutes later, a battered silhouette appeared, a Warthog limping in, smoke trailing faintly from its engines. Cheers rose from the flight line. Mechanics and pilots dropped what they were doing to wave it. In. Sarah brought the bird down rough, wheels screeching, fuselage groaning. The engines coughed once, twice, then died. Silence. The canopy cracked open. She pulled herself out, legs trembling, sweat-soaked flight suit clinging to her. Her hair stuck to her forehead, her face streaked with exhaustion, but her eyes were clear. Harris was already walking toward her. They met at the nose of the bird, dust swirling around their boots. For a moment, neither spoke. The noise of the base faded, the medics shouting, the engines spinning down. It was just them. Harris nodded once, slow and deliberate. "You saved." "My men." Sarah's lips curved faintly, though her voice was hoarse. "They were our men, out there." He studied her, the lines of fatigue on her face, the weight in her shoulders. And then, for the first time in his career, he let go of the iron that chained him. He extended his hand. "I don't take orders well, but I'll take them from you." Sarah stared at his hand, then clasped it. Firm, strong, equal. "Not finished after all," she said quietly. That night, the base quieted. The SEALs slept. Ramirez in the infirmary, the others sprawled in bunks like men who had given every last ounce and somehow still breathed. Harris sat outside, the desert night cool against his skin, a mug of bitter coffee in his hand. Sarah joined him, dropping onto the crate beside him, holding her own mug. They sat in silence a long while, staring at the stars. Finally, Harris spoke. "You know, I thought it was finished back there. Thought the last thing I'd see was dirt and gunfire. But you didn't let it end." Sarah sipped her coffee, her eyes on the horizon. "You didn't either. You bent when it mattered. That's why they're alive." He gave a low laugh, shaking his head. "That wasn't bending. That was breaking." "Then maybe we both broke," she said softly. "But sometimes that's how something stronger gets built." He looked at her then, really looked. The exhaustion, the grit, the unshakable fire. And he realized she wasn't just the pilot who had saved them. She was the partner he hadn't known he needed. The desert wind whispered across the base. Somewhere, a generator hummed. Harris raised his mug in a quiet salute. "To not finished?" Sarah tapped hers against his. "To not finished." They drank in silence, the weight of survival sitting heavy, but no longer unbearable. For tomorrow would bring new orders, new missions, new fights. But tonight, they had won, not because of rank, not because of doctrine, because when death came hunting, a commander and a pilot had stood together, broken the rules, and refused to let the story end. And so, the legend began.